guys, Brothers Jackson here. I just want to start this video by telling you all that I have a little bit of a cold, so I'm sorry if my voice doesn't sound the same as usual. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. I was hiking alone up in Arkansas some years back on a trail in Withrow Springs State Park. I can't remember the trail name for sure, but after looking online, I'm confident it was probably the Forest Trail though. I live on the other side of the US and haven't been back since to check. I went after my brother, whom I was in Arkansas to visit, recommended the park to me as he knew I enjoyed hiking. This trail was primarily long and narrow and only the elevation changed throughout. It was surrounded either side by a wall of trees that gave the trail an air of tightness. All was good this day. It was cloudy and a bit windy, not too warm, yet the weather wasn't too poor that I wanted to leave. I'd been hiking a good long while, I'm unsure exactly how long, when I would hear rustling in the trees at regular intervals. Now, looking back, I'm sure I caught sight of something shimmering in the bushes, but at the time, I thought it was just the daylight poking through the leaves. Before I realised it was beginning to go dark and I had spent the whole day hiking around and enjoying the sights. The impending night and the still occurring rustling was making me uneasy. I decided to head back to my car. I knew I could be back to the car in at least half the time I had been hiking because I had constantly been stopping and starting to spy the local wildlife and had, generally, been taking the whole hike easy. I was about halfway back and was walking with pace when I glimpsed something that appeared to be gold and red. I continued walking, my mind not as fast as my footfalls, but when I realised how out of place those colours were, I stopped in my tracks and turned back. There, sat on a bare branch about 20 feet away from me, was a curious looking owl-like creature, easily 5 foot tall. Now, I am by no means an avid bird watcher, and as previously stated, I'm not from Arkansas, so don't know all the fauna, but I must admit that I do have a decent knowledge of animals and plants, and this odd looking thing was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was well aware of my presence and stood on the branch, watching me, its wings twitching with every step I took, its gold glimmering in what was left of the daylight. I was about 7 or 8 feet away from it, trying to get closer, not sure what I would do if I ever did manage to get to it, when it suddenly took off from the branch and flew right above my head and over the trees on the other side of the trail. Before I could even fathom this, 4 small golden chicks flew out from deeper within the wood, following what I assumed to be the mother. I was completely taken aback, but could only attempt to pursue them so far without leaving the trail. And I wasn't going to leave the trail, as stated previously, I don't know the area that well. Obviously, I have attempted to find or identify this mysterious bird, but all attempts so far have been unsuccessful. As stupid as it sounds, the best way I could probably describe it to you guys is if the Pokemon Ho-Oh was an owl. I never felt threatened by this creature. In fact, I feel like with it protecting its young, I was probably threatening it more, and it was probably more scared of me than I was of this bird. If anyone in Arkansas, or anywhere else for that matter, believes they have seen this bird, or if you think you know what it is, I would love to know. I had just graduated from college in 2016 and, as a celebration, my dad took us from our home in LA to Redwood National Park, way up at the northern tip of California. It was summer and we were up for a week of hiking, camping, fishing and hunting. The drive there took us just under 12 hours, and on the first day, it was dark when we arrived and we were happy to just set up the tent and get some rest. At our camping spot, we were alone, and I also want to point out that me and my father are avid and seasoned campers, and have been practicing survival, hunting, fishing, etc. for as long as I can remember, and he had done the same with his father. Not to mention that we had both been up here in this exact area multiple times before throughout the years. With that said, let me give you a rundown of the strange experiences that plagued our trip that week. It originally started on night 1, though we didn't really have an idea at the time. It was about 2 or 3 AM and I woke up to the sounds of some horrifying gritty growls, long, low and rumbling through the forest. I was about to wake my dad, but he had already begun to stir himself. The sounds continued for a while. They sounded like they were coming from a big bastard and sounded as though they were quite far away, on the other side of a small patch of coast redwood trees which were located next to our tent. Me and my dad glanced at each other in confusion. A few long, quiet minutes of contemplation passed, only the repetition of those blood-curdling howls. My dad finally turned to me and said, uncertainly, that it must be bears. I wasn't fucking stupid. I'd never heard a bear sound like that, but unwilling to go out and look for myself and desperate for sleep, I took his reasoning as gospel and tried to get back to sleep. I still remember hearing that call until I finally fell to sleep. The next morning, we were up at the crack of dawn, as was normal on our trips. We began packing the tent up and planned on spending the day fishing at a small body of water that was surrounded by trees on either side, making it secluded pretty much every time we visited. Despite being summer, there was a light drizzle, but it wasn't so bad that we felt like we couldn't do anything. This lake was about a 2-hour hike away from our previous spot and we were there before dinner time. What we saw when we got there still shocks me to this day. Most of the trees closest to the water's edge had had their branches snapped and tossed on the floor, some of them too thick or heavy for a normal man to snap, and the bark was peeled off the tree trunks, leaving the wood underneath bare. Some strips of bark were draped over other branches, and it must have been fresh as the bare wood still had the rich colours that only freshly exposed wood had. However, this wasn't the worst part. My dad shouted me over and I went to his side. On some large boulders that are partly submerged by water and partly on the banks were 3 barely distinguishable battered fish. And by battered, I mean they had clearly been clubbed off the rocks as innards were dispersed like a firework over the rock's surface. My dad couldn't dismiss this as bears and admitted how strange and disturbing this all was. He checked the perimeter of the area and, after finding nothing else amiss, asked if I still wanted to fish and camp here. I said, yeah, why not? And we erected our tent before spending a good, uneventful 6 hours fishing for dinner. We lit a small campfire, cooked some fish, ate some fish, had a talk about the future and what I wanted to do, put the fire out, and turned in for another night's rest. Unfortunately, this night would turn out to be more eventful than the last. I again woke deep into the night to hear grunts, in the same sort of tone as the growls the night before, but from right outside our tent. Before I could gasp, which I was going to, my dad covered my mouth and put his finger to my lips. It was silent other than these really heavy footsteps, often followed by this primal grunt. I was visibly shaking, and I could tell my dad was pretty terrified but was trying to play it cool. All of a sudden, the sound of our pans and plates being thrown across the ground, followed by a loud grunt, made me weep out loud. Suddenly, it all went quiet, and then these heavy footsteps raced over as if they were going to plough through our tent. The footsteps stopped abruptly right outside our tent and was followed by heavy, nasally breaths. From in the distance, we again heard the growls from the previous night, and this creature, whatever it was, began panting and grunting loudly and wildly before racing off into the trees, the sound of breaking branches emanating. My dad told me not to open the tent and to try and get some sleep, beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. I somehow managed to fall asleep, and the next day we found absolutely massive footprints in the soft, wet sand outside our tent. We didn't fuck about and basically threw the tent into its bag and shot off from the area, collecting our pots and pans and leaving behind the massive footprints that I could take 2 paces in. For the next 3 nights, we heard or saw little, other than the odd growl at night, which we adjusted to as it wasn't really doing us any harm, and when hiking to our next spot, we would occasionally see broken branches, but nothing else. However, that all changed on the 6th night. It was our penultimate night at the park, and we had enjoyed ourselves immensely. Where we had decided to pitch our tent this time was nothing spectacular, just a small clearing in the woods. I had awoke close to dawn, though it was still dark, to answer nature's call. I unzipped the tent and walked over to the nearest tree when I heard rustling in the trees a bit further back. Mid-pee, I peered my head from around the tree trunk and was met with soft yellow eyes. They were sharp really, but not bright, and they were at least 3 feet above my eye level. At first, I thought it was something in a tree, or on a tree branch, but then my appearance must have startled it, and it moved back, rushing deeper into the woods. I stood, dick in hand, at what I identified as a huge bipedal creature, thick, matted, greasy hair, brown in colour, covering most of its body, and primal, Neolithic features on its face. It was, by all accounts, a Bigfoot. I stood in the dark for at least 5 minutes out of fear, maybe out of sheer shock. I climbed back into my tent and didn't tell my dad the next day for fear he wouldn't believe me, and since we hadn't seen much or heard much since night 2, I didn't want to ruin the end of our trip. I didn't need to tell him though. He saw all he needed to see on our last day. Basically, the whole trail we had taken this week was one big circle, and we would complete this in the 7 days and end up back at our car for the last night and sleep in the back of it. So it's the daytime, and on our way back we take the rocky terrain which sees us climbing some small peaks. Traditionally, when we had been here before, we had used the extra elevation to do sightseeing on the last day, and this year was no different. It basically took us back the way we came on a difficult 12 to 13 hour hike, and we would go non-stop except for food and drink breaks to make it back for sleep. We would always get back at about 7 or 8 PM, and it's a real test of endurance. So, we had been walking all day, and it was about 6 PM. We had just passed that small body of water that we had fished in earlier in the trip, and directly adjacent to us was another small peak or hill. The hill wasn't too far away that you couldn't see the foot trail on the other side with your naked eye. In fact, you could see it clearly, and that's when we saw it. My dad spotted it first. At first, I just thought they were other hikers. My dad shouted me and told me to look. They were clearly bigger and taller than normal people. 3 of them. Huge, hairy, bipedal beasts slowly ascending the slope. My dad stood there, mouth wide open, eyes like dinner plates. They looked like how you'd imagine hunter-gatherers would look back in the Stone Ages. Hunched shoulders, hairy features, walking in a loose arrow formation. Me and my dad stood rooted to the spot, just watching these hairy humans looming tall, even from that distance, until they vanished into the tree line. We weren't scared, but me and my dad rushed back to our car faster than we usually would have. The next day, on the 12-hour trip home, we barely spoke about it. Once we did get home, we said nothing to my mother but had lengthy conversations about it with each other once I'd confessed to what I'd seen that night when I had to pee. Me and my dad had never been big believers in Bigfoot, but after these events, whenever we go hiking or camping, we are always aware of what might be lurking somewhere in the trees. I used to live in the middle of nowhere in South New Jersey when I was growing up, and being a kid with not too many friends and not much to do, I spent most of my time in the Pine Barrens, aimlessly wandering around, building tree houses and forts, and just having a good time. My fun was cut short by an experience that made me grow up faster than I anticipated and made me stop going into the pines as a kid. I was 13 when this happened, and as usual, since being a really young kid, I went off alone. I never went on any trails or paths and always explored as deep into the wilderness as I could. It probably was as dangerous as it sounds, but I was a kid who didn't care, and to be honest, my parents didn't seem to care much either. This particular day, I was on my travels, talking to myself and playing an army game by myself. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a pretty cold day, not freezing but chilly, and I was jumping about and kicking around leaves that were on the forest floor. I caught sight of it out of the corner of my eye at first. It was stood watching me in the distance. I looked over to see what appeared to be a peculiar looking goat, its face stretched and contorted. It didn't scare me. I thought it may have been attacked in a fight or something. I just stood, staring at it staring back at me. I was so tempted to go over to the goat. Despite the somewhat placid nature, I had always been told not to get too close to any wild animals and to respect their space. I refrained and kept looking. It didn't budge, almost as if it wasn't real, as if it was a statue. I was beginning to feel uncomfortable at the glaring goat, and I decided I'd just get back to my own thing. The goat seemed to freak and snarled at me before unveiling two leathery, bat-like wings. I screamed and fell backwards, and this creature, which I now knew wasn't a goat, bounded out of some shrubbery and came barreling towards me on two hooved legs. I scrambled to my feet and began running, this thing hot on my heels, its steamy breath on my neck. I was crying out in fear as I ran, the boost of pure adrenaline pumping me higher than I'd ever been. It was either run or be killed. I slashed my face on a sharp branch hanging from a tree. The blood streaked across my face and fell to the ground. This seemed to excite the goat thing, and I was beginning to cry now too. I didn't know where to go. Would it follow me home? I kept running and saw the light of the field that separated me from my house. I burst out from the trees and continued running. I couldn't hear the goat now, but I kept running just in case. I didn't stop, not until I got home and was safe in my room. I looked out of my window and there was no sign of it. It didn't follow me out from the trees. Afterwards, I didn't go into the woods much. I'd obviously heard the legend of the Jersey Devil. I mean, I grew up in it. I grew up in the same area, but no part of me ever thought it could be real. I thought it was just a silly story used to scare kids. If what I saw that day wasn't the Jersey Devil, I sure as hell am sure that that damned creature had something to do with the origins of the story, because what I saw, it matched the descriptions to a T. Two springs ago, I had set up some trail cams on my land to try and get an idea of the populations for the upcoming hunting season. They live streamed back to my PC, back at my house, and one morning I woke up and got about my daily routine, which included checking the cameras to make sure they were all in fully working order. I would review the footage itself later in the day. So I'm looking and I notice that where one of my cameras should be showing, there's a grey box and a small blue box saying no signal. This hasn't happened before, and I assumed it had just lost signal. I checked through the recorded footage on my PC and it appeared to show something behind the camera, fiddling with it until it falls from the tree. It's on the floor but facing down, so all you can see is a black screen, and then it cuts off. I drive out in my buggy. Where I had this camera placed was about 1 mile from my property, and it takes me no more than 5 minutes to get to the spot. The strange thing is that I can't find the camera anywhere, and I mean anywhere. I find bits of the black strap all torn up, but there is no sign of the camera at all. Obviously, I'm pretty pissed that my $200 trail cam has been destroyed by some freaky animal, and I decide that I would come back that night to try and stake out the animal that did it. I didn't plan on killing it, just observing it and identifying it. It's late and I headed out alone. I have no reason to take someone with me as I'm staying on my property, and I set up a small camouflage tent a few yards away from where the trail cam was, and I wait with my night vision binoculars. Nothing could prepare me for what I saw. It was as if it just suddenly came into being. 2 bright dots next to the tree the trail cam used to be on. I was deathly silent as I looked through the scope, trying to ID it, but I couldn't. How could you ID this? I don't know what colour it was due to the night vision, but I couldn't make it out at all in the dark, so it was black or dark grey. It looked like a massive shaggy dog or unkempt wolf, except all 4 of its legs were facing the wrong way, its knees bending inwards like a horse. I had to slowly cover my mouth as this mutated beast emerged from the bushes nearby. It was easily 5 feet tall and 8 feet long, no exaggeration, and it was bony. Its ribs were fully visible, as in the skin had torn away, revealing the actual bone in a hole on one side of its chest. Same with the bottom of its legs and patches on its back. Bare bone could be seen. It had a large head, like a Tasmanian tiger, and sported huge, razor-like teeth which, along with its chin, appeared to be soaked in a liquid, probably blood. It didn't look healthy, but it seemed to be fine with the condition of its body. It walked over to the tree and sniffed it, and then it did something I'll never forget. It turned and looked right into my eyes through the binoculars. I did that stupid thing they do in movies where they flap a little bit and knocked over the tripod the binoculars were on and rolled onto my back. I dared not move. I lay there for at least 15 minutes before moving, after I was sure I could hear nothing. I got up and looked through the binoculars cautiously, expecting to see those blood-drenched teeth centimetres from my face. I saw nothing. It was clear the dog had gone. Now, before I end this tale, a few weeks back, I woke up early in the morning. Being winter, it was dark outside and I went to the kitchen to brew the kettle. I like tea, what can I say? I'm about to go and check the trail cams, as I always do, but just before I do, I pull up the blinds. Out in the open field, just outside my porch, I see this huge, distorted dog prowling the field. It must have seen me pull up the blinds and instantly turned its head to look at me. Sharpened yellow eyes with focused black pupils assessed my entire quaking body. It suddenly turns and runs off into the woods in the distance. I follow it with my eyes from the kitchen. I'm not stupid, I wouldn't follow that outside. I noticed its exposed bones, really dark grey fur, and awkwardly bending knees. Now, I've set up trail cams in the same area since, but I've never caught anything like it since. I've looked into it and can't really find anything matching the description of this dog-like creature, and my son recommended I share it here in case anyone else has seen it. Hey guys, Brothers Jackson here. Like I say, full of a cold. Still hope you enjoyed the video, still hope you enjoyed the narration. I've been waiting to bring this one out for a long time. I've only got one other video that's still not quite finished, but it's quite a long video that I had waiting to be uploaded for as long as this one, if that makes sense. Yeah, I've been waiting to upload this one for ages. I've had the stories for ages, and I've just not really got around to finishing it. I mean, I did record it at one point with the wrong mic. I am rambling. I hope you enjoyed this video. The first story as well, I had to include it. I know it's not particularly a scary story, but I thought it was dead interesting about like the golden red bird. I mean, well, owl-like thing. I mean, it's crazy. If I saw something like that, I would be blown away. So I thought I'd include that one, and I thought I'd include it at the start because I realised it wasn't as scary, and I thought, if you listen into like two scary stories and then you heard that and then the other scary story, it might break up the flow a bit, but I just thought it was worth the narration. The second story, the Bigfoot one, for a Bigfoot story, that was pretty good because I am not huge on Bigfoot stories, if I am honest, and that was a pretty good story, so I was happy to have found that. However, my favourite one, no, do you know what, my favourite one this episode was that Bigfoot one. That was a pretty good account, and they had multiple things happen. However, I did like the last one with like, I mean, I don't know, is it like a crawler? I don't know, he doesn't know either. Leave it in the comments what you think any of the unidentified creatures are from the first story, the bird. If you've got any ideas what you think it is, comment that. And from the last one, comment as well. Hopefully I've got a few collaborations coming out in the next few weeks. Hopefully I've got that big UFO extraterrestrial video, which has been waiting to come out for literally months, but I've been recording it in parts. But I've also been, I also think I'm going to send a couple of the stories over to some other narrators, get them to narrate a couple, so that'd be pretty cool. And yeah, there's going to be more paranormal stuff, because obviously I really like doing the paranormal stories. I'm going to try and get a few more of the like strangers, let's not meet sort of stuff, you know, like stalkers, dodgy characters and stuff like that. Anyway guys, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and that is about it. I hope you all enjoyed it and have a good week. Thank you very much. Peace out.